Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel, hope you're all good and well. So time for a Saturday premiere and time to rank the albums of the symphonic metal band Epica. The band were formed back in 2002 by Mark Jansen and they then had the name Sahara Dust. Obviously later changed it to Epica, which is incidentally the name of a Camelot album, and that inspired the name of the band. Also, Mark Jansen actually, he was in After Forever before the formation of Epica. And he obviously left After Forever, and that's how this band really came about. It was through Mark Jansen meeting Simone Simons, and the rest is pretty much history, as they say. Epica have 8 albums to their name, and I have to say this is possibly the hardest ranking I can remember doing in recent memory. I mean, we've had bands like Enslaved as well, who are extremely difficult to rank. I think Epica do fall in that category of a band with an almost flawless discography. In fact, I would say pretty much flawless. There's one album here that I found slightly easier to separate from the rest, but my goodness, this is some band with a really, I mean, they live up to their name, right? Epica. This is an epic catalogue of music that, for me, symphonic metal wise, they're possibly my favourite symphonic metal band. They get comparisons to Nightwish an awful lot. For me, I think their albums have actually been very consistent. Obviously, they've not had quite the changes in lineup that Nightwish have had over time. I think Epica have had that bit of stability to them slightly more. And they just also, I think, have really great songwriting abilities. And, you know, the vocals of Simone Simons speak for themselves. I don't need to talk about those too much. And yeah, let's crack on with this ranking from my least favourite to my favourite. We'll start with number 8 here, which is going to be Consigned to Oblivion, the second album from the band. And with some irony, this is the only album I probably would consign to Oblivion if I had to choose any of these albums as my least favourite to kind of, erase. And Consigned to Oblivion, though, it's still a very good album. For me, it lacks the punchy production that later albums had, later Epica albums. I also just find it instrumentally not quite as interesting and versatile as a lot of the other Epica albums, but I'll name 3 favourite tracks from here: Dance of Fate, Last Crusade, Mother of Light. So it's still good. I mean, it's still well worth listening to if you're an Epica fan or a fan of symphonic metal generally. It's still worth a visit, but that's my least favourite album, Consigned to Oblivion. Next up at number 7, we have Requiem for the Indifference. And this is where it started to get incredibly difficult to rank these albums already at number 7. Favourite tracks from this one: Storm the Sorrow, Delirium and Avalanche towards the end of the album. Now, interestingly for me, the problem with this album is I think it starts off so strong, it just doesn't maintain it. With other Epica albums, they just maintain a fantastic level of musicianship, interesting song work and dynamics. And, you know, you have a great range of melodic stuff as well as the sort of heavier, harder hitting stuff. So it's just all sorts of great fusions of things happening in Epica albums. But for me, Requiem for the Indifferent, it just starts off with a bang. You got stuff like Storm the Sorrow, right? But then just slightly fades away for me. And that's the problem I have with Requiem for the Indifferent, whereas other albums I just think are just more consistently fantastic all the way through. At number 6, this was a really hard choice, because the Holographic Principle, as I remember, it was in my top 10 of 2016. Yet here it is, quite low down at number 6 in the Epica ranking. You know, going back through all these albums, I've just found there's just so much good stuff. I've had to sacrifice a favourite album here and put it lower down, and that's the Holographic Principle. Now, Holographic Principle is much more of a death metal, heavier fusion kind of an album. This is where the band have really stepped up the heaviness. The production's punchy though. There's a lot of great riffs on this album if you prefer that with Epica. For me, I love that, but for this album, and compared to the fantastic symphonic and I would say slightly more melodic stuff you get on their other albums, I do slightly prefer that, I think, overall than what we get here on Holographic Principle. But, like, the middle of this album is some of Epica's best work. I mean, let's be honest here. Like, Divide and Conquer, incredible heavy song. Beyond the Matrix, one of the best catchy symphonic songs the band have done, I think. What a track that is. And Once Upon a Nightmare, a beautiful, more operatic, slower, melancholic piece on the album as well. And it's just a great album, and it's a shame that, you know, it comes in at number 6. Others will have this higher, for sure. Number 5 is Design Your Universe, their 4th album. Again, a slightly controversial one, perhaps, but there's no right order for this band. There really isn't. I have to say that again. Design Your Universe, though, it has a lot of the Epica staples on this album. If you like Epica generally, the chances are you will like this album. You'll probably even possibly have it as your favourite album. It has just fantastic stuff like Unleashed, Our Destiny. One of my all-time favourite tracks on here is Tides of Time. A wonderful sort of, you know, uplifting yet sad symphonic piece with just, you know, focused much more on Simone Simons' operatic vocals, and just the song just kind of, you know, it's just beautiful. Let's just say that. It's just beautiful. And Design Your Universe as a whole, though, the reason it's not quite higher for me is it just doesn't quite have as many of the memorable moments, though, despite, I mean, Tides of Time, yet, and Unleashed, sure. But there's other albums here, the next 4, where I just slightly enjoy the memorable parts, the memorable Epica choruses and passages of music just slightly more. So that's all I can say, really. That's all I can say. So Design Your Universe, only 5, and that hurts. That does hurt, only having that in at 5. Now number 4, I've actually gone for the debut album, The Phantom Agony, and many would have this lower down. In fact, the only Epica rankings I've seen, this one is generally pretty low in rankings, even maybe at the bottom. But The Phantom Agony, the thing is, it's definitely one of the, for me, it was one of the best albums that year in 2003, looking back with all the new metal stuff you had coming out then. This album may well have gone under the radar of many people as it was the debut album of the band. And yet, it's absolutely sublime, this album. I think it's wonderful stuff. There is a middle part of the album for me where the album doesn't quite sort of, you know, it lulls a bit into symphonic metal by the numbers type territory, if I can say that without kind of getting into too much trouble. But I do feel like that with the middle part of this album. But there's stuff on here that is simply put just Epica gold, and that's stuff like Sensorium, Cry for the Moon, and The Phantom Agony is another one of my all-time favourite Epica tracks, like Tides of Time, like some others I'm going to name, but like I was saying, Beyond the Matrix, it's one of those S-tier kind of tracks, that The Phantom Agony, that's one you have to check out. And this album, I'd say, I think, yeah, it's number 4, it's higher than most people would have, but I think it's just a cracking debut album that deserves a bit more attention than it gets. So it's my number 4 here. And number 3, we go into really just incredible Epica stuff now. Absolutely incredible stuff. All 3 of these albums are easily 9 out of 10s. So I talk about my 9s out of 10s, and I did a video recently talking about the 9s out of 10s I've given and whether I'd change those. Well, these 3 would be very stable 9s out of 10s, and they would not change at all. Never. The Divine Conspiracy. Right, this is an amazing album, and I think it's many people's favourites and number 1 album as well. Not quite my number 1, just for the reasons that I just slightly prefer the next 2 albums, and I'll explain my reasoning very shortly why I slightly prefer those 2 albums. But Divine Conspiracy boasts songs like Chasing the Dragon, Never Enough. Never Enough has that, I think it's that pre-chorus, and it's just tremendous stuff from Simone. You know, she's really kind of belting it out. It goes perfectly with the instrumentals and stuff, and the symphonic moments on that song are incredible too. Sancta Terra is another great example of that sort of a track, which just has great rhythms and melodic sections. It has it all. So Divine Conspiracy, just here at number 3, not quite higher because, well, this was difficult, okay? This was really tough because this has been my number 1 album probably for quite a long time. This was the album through which I discovered Epica because of the single, The Essence of Silence. Yet it's the Quantum Enigma coming in here at number 2. So this album for me is perhaps the best Epica album from the very start to the very end in many ways. It has a wonderful flow. All the songs have a certain urgency. They get to the point quite quickly, I think, with a lot of the chorus work. And they're very memorable songs. And this is an album just packed full of that sort of memorable Epica song, with a lot of standout Simone Simons moments, a lot of great guitar work, as ever, from Mark Jansen and everything going on here in this album. My favourite tracks on here, The Essence of Silence, as I've already mentioned, Chemical Insomnium, and then the Kingdom of Heaven Part 3, the title track of this album, is, for me, possibly... Oh, there's one other Kingdom of Heaven track that I like maybe slightly more coming up in my next pick, which is the only album left. But Kingdom of Heaven Part 2 is fantastic as well. And this album is just, like I say, it is perhaps arguably just the most consistent of the Epica albums in terms of quality of track. But the next album has won, and that is my number one pick, which is Omega, just from 2 years ago. But this album has everything. It's perfectly produced. For me, the production is 10 out of 10, brings out the very best of all the elements of Epica as a band. For me, again, it has a lot of great Simone moments in the songs, and a lot of the memorable moments really stand out on here. But because of the run of songs on here, there's a run of songs from the Skeleton Key, for me, pretty much around that time, almost to the end of the album, and it's just, you know, top songs. And for me, I think that this is possibly the best Epica album, and it shows how good a band they are that this is their latest album, deep into their careers, and they have come out with something as top-notch as Omega. And I think they've done a DVD, a live performance or something. I really want to watch that, actually, if I can get my hands on that, because that would be amazing. So my three favourite tracks on Omega, my favourite Epica album of all time: Seal of Solomon, Gaia, Kingdom of Heaven Part 3, but this album is full of tracks, so I have to give some honourable mentions to Rivers, Abyss of Time, Code of Life. I mean, this is a truly fantastic album. If you like symphonic metal and you didn't check out Omega from 2021, don't sleep on this. Go check this one out, because I don't think you'll regret it, and I think it's just absolutely, you know, fabulous music. Yeah, I honestly also would say that, you know, like I mentioned earlier, Epica just have this consistency of quality output from album to album, right from album number one. I mean, Consignment to Oblivion for me is their weakest, but it still has a lot of, you know, really quite captivating symphonic metal stuff on there. So anyway, I'm going to stop blathering on and stop waffling and bring this to an end. But do let me know what your favourite Epica albums are, or just give me a ranking in the comments. There aren't too many albums here. If you're new to Epica, I would just recommend listening to all these albums, perhaps in order chronologically from the Phantom Agony right till Omega. I think there's enough here to enjoy that you don't need to worry too much about filler, because there's hardly any filler on most of Epica's albums. So thanks again for joining me. I hope you all have great Saturday evenings, mornings, afternoons, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Otherwise, until next time from me, bye for now.